Good. But today we're going to talk about visual schedules. I'm here with Tracy. We're both together today, which is rare. We're usually both working remotely doing this, but it may not appear that way. We are sitting side by side, both with our, there she is. But we're going to talk about visual schedules. And to kind of get into it, I'll go ahead and share what we're going to be talking about today. If I can advance the slide. There we go. So today's schedule, this is what we're looking at. We're going to start off with introductions and move on through why do we use schedules, and then go over some various types of visual schedules, some scheduling tips, and then you have time for questions and feedback, and we'll wrap it up. But this is kind of our overview of today and a visual schedule.
That's
just
what I was going to say. I like what you did there, Kevin. You made us a visual schedule for the day.
So we'll start with introductions. Of course, I put myself at the top, so I'll go first. But I'm Kevin Stevens. I'm with WKEC, and I'm a low incident consultant focusing on low incident disabilities and autism. Again, I'm here at CEC with a ton of people, not in our room. We're kind of in a back corner, sheltered from everyone, but it's good to be here. I'll let Tracy introduce herself.
All right. And I'm Tracy Belfield. I'm a field training coordinator with the Kentucky Autism Training Center. So I do all things autism. And so I'm excited that we're going to do visual schedules today. You guys ranked it high on the survey that we sent out. So let's talk about visual schedules.
Well, this is what I like about visual schedules. I always like putting easy things first so I can cross off a couple. So as we move through the slides here, my space
While
bar.
he's moving through the slides.
Oh, he's done that. We can move on.
That was too fast. Put in the chat whether you currently use visual schedules with your students. Do they have an individualized visual schedule? Yes or no in the chat.
I know we've got some using them out there. I see them everywhere.
Nobody puts them in the chat. I'm gonna nobody is doing this. All right, there we go. Here we go.
Great. It seems like we've got a lot in use.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better.
But this is always the first thing I look for when I go into classroom, because it tells me a lot about the structure of the program. Somebody's taken the time to create a master schedule and adapt that down to student level. And to make it individualized, it really is a great tool for your students. But as a teacher, I don't think I could operate without my own visual schedule and all the students having their own visual schedules. So what are visual schedules? Basically, they're just structured visual representation of daily activities and tasks. And again, they can be for a single activity, multiple activities, or it can be your whole day put together in one. Typically, we see pictures on visual schedules. Pictures or symbols. Written words are also used, but we may have students that don't respond to pictures or symbols as well as some others, and they may need something a little bit more supportive, like an object schedule. And I don't know if any of you all have used object schedules, but for younger students and students with more complex needs, often I like to pair up even a visual schedule with objects to help with that transition. Like if it's time for lunch, I may actually stick a fork in a student's hand while they look at their schedule, or the schedule itself may be like the visual schedule itself may be just a series of objects laid out to represent how the day is going.
And those objects really help make it much more concrete for those times, especially when we use that clip art, whether it's board maker. Sometimes those are just too abstract. Like has really gone on. There is an actual cafeteria. Again, just to make it a little bit more concrete for the student until they're ready to go to that abstract picture.
But one of the benefits it does for students, it provides predictability and reduces anxiety for students with autism. And this is kind of what I looked into. One of the biggest contributing factors to anxiety for any individual, whether they have autism or not, is what they call the fear of the unknown. And it's actually something that's been researched a little bit, but it's just not knowing what is coming next adds to that person's anxiety and anxiousness. And it can create some chaotic moments if students don't deal with that anxiety in an appropriate way.
You know, and Kevin, that's probably somewhat related to what I hear about as far as pushback on schedules is teachers will go, or even instructional assistants of, oh, Johnny knows his schedule. He doesn't need the visual schedule. That is great when we're running on our normal routine and Johnny's kind of having a good day. But again, just like many of the supports we've talked about, we want the student to be as independent as possible. We want to support them really thinking about their worst day So what do they need? And then let's be honest, guys, how many weeks of school are really regular school weeks where something doesn't happen, i.e. this week being Thanksgiving. And so there's different activities going on in the building. So there's always assemblies going on, fire drills going on, lockdown drills. There's just things that happen in the schedule that are going to be different. And if we can prepare our students and show them on their individualized schedule of where these activities are going to happen, again, it reduces that anxiety and that fear for them and just lets them know what's coming and lets them just plan ahead for that.
And one thing I do want to point out on this schedule or this slide here is we often get into creating very pretty and ornate looking things, and we often overlook some of our students' strengths. We may have students that are great readers. They may not need the supports that a pictures or symbol will provide, but written schedules are still just as important for those students to have a series of events that they've got to accomplish throughout the day. But don't overlook the actual just written schedules like we would make for ourselves too.
And I would say for middle school and high school students, if you have students that are reading or that are, like you said, readers, even printing out the schedule from IC and maybe laminating it, again, that's their normal schedule. But when something's going to change, you could take a dry erase marker and mark on there kind of when that fire drill is going to be or when that pep assembly is going to be to let them know there's a change in the schedule.
So while we use visual schedules for communication support, it helps students understand the expectations. That is the key factor for reducing that anxiety, is knowing what's expected of you throughout the day. And maybe not at this moment, but I can look forward to things later in the day or know that I've got maybe a task to do later in the day that I'm not real fond of, but it helps me prepare for that mentally and to get those emotions under control and ready to work. But it also reduces verbal instructions, the amount of verbal instructions we have to provide for transition purposes. If we got that schedule and a system in place where they can check their schedule and it helps move on, that saves us for having to repeat those verbal instructions, because we all know that most of our students have trouble processing a lot of in-depth verbal information at one time. So just the least we could do verbally and provide that supports visually, it's going to help the student.
Again, it's kind of thinking of that system of prompts that, again, we've covered already, but thinking about that even within your visual schedules that you're creating. And then our common theme, I think we've mentioned it in every single session, is promoting independence. We want the students to be able to do it on their own eventually. Again, with a younger student or a more complex student, of course, you're going to have to model and you're going to have to kind of direct them and show them how to do things. But remember, the goal is always to back off and reduce that prompting level and really let them become independent on running that own schedule with them. And kind of in going with promoting their independence, a lot of times I see the visual schedule of, hey, we're going to do reading and math, and then we're going to go to PE. But I don't sometimes see when is their scheduled sensory breaks, when is their scheduled bathroom breaks. So for students that have those special things built into the schedule, that really should be on their visual schedule, even their therapies on speech therapy day, that should be put on there and as a change on their schedule. If they get OTPT, any of those things. So again, we want to make sure that we put information on there to help promote that independence. And then, as we've already addressed, reducing that stress and confusion of why is today different, what's coming next, when is this going to be over, those type of things.
And just on this slide, I would like to point out to really be selective about the visuals you use, because my anxiety uninstalling visual there, to me, when I look at it, actually looks like my anxiety is increasing. Like I see that bar moving from left to right. So I didn't intentionally put that in that way, but after I looked at it, I kind of thought about it, and that's not a good visual for reducing anxiety. So just be mindful of those things too.
Kevin, I think that's a great point, because while we talked about words and pictures and even symbols on schedules, I think really looking at what those pictures show and thinking about, oh, for bathroom, they may be able to do an icon and they can generalize that. But for the cafeteria, they might need an actual physical object. So just really thinking about the pictures and the supports that we use and knowing those may not be consistent.
So for cognitive advantages, these are some of the big ones. They support executive functioning skills, those time management skills, planning ahead. It really supports those skills. But the main thing I see is the biggest advantage is improves transition between activities, not so much in a time management standpoint. From a teacher standpoint, that's one of the greatest gifts it gave me was reducing that time in transitions, but to actually look at the stress, kind of lower its levels when students can see their day and what's coming up next. But again, the time management skills, those are again, critical executive functioning skills that we need to help our students develop. But most importantly, provide clear structure and routine. And that's again, from an outside observer, when I came into the room as an administrator, I would come into the room and when I saw visual schedules, I could tell the teachers put a lot of work into creating a clear structure and routine for themselves. And then if they apply the independent visual schedule. But as we move through the day,
You see that we've marked off another schedule. So next we are going to move into types of schedules. So types of schedules, kind of like we've talked about, there's different pictures and symbols that you can use on. There's also different lengths of schedule. So for some of our students, they're going to be able to handle a full day schedule. So that's what some of the symbols that you see on this slide. So it's kind of a very comprehensive. It's all day. Again, you can use photos, you can use words, you can use symbols. And then you're going to decide where it needs to be displayed in the classroom. So oftentimes I see teachers with the full day classroom schedule. Some students, many students are not going to be ready for a full day schedule to be posted at one time. And so you may have to do a morning and an afternoon. Examples on here. You can cover the schedule. And so you kind of have the flipping paper going over there, or on the other side where they're physically taking it off the schedule and moving it to the done side. So.
But these are actually some pictures I took from classrooms this year. So you look on the left-hand side is a visual schedule that's actually permanent. The pictures are permanent on there. And as they get through the day, they fold over the check marks on top. And this is a good example of a master schedule that the routine is going to stay consistent. The right-hand side was from a middle school classroom, and it actually is fully adjustable. They can, as things may arise, they may have something different that day, they can put that in there. But one of our roles in the school is to help coach kids through this as part of their transition routine. I know one of my strategies I used was, hey, it's time to check your schedule. And that started the whole transition process. So if I was working with a student, I would go over there with them with their visual schedule and coach them through this. Look, we've done this. This is what's next. And you may have other strategies embedded that may support a student to be successful in different settings, maybe some reinforcement activities. We'll talk about those here in a second. But again, it could be a master schedule. It could be an individual schedule on a desk. I like a combination of two. I like every student to have their own visual schedule. But the types of visual schedule, and this is what I find important because we've all seen the big ones in the classroom that focus on that full day from start to finish. Now, if I was taking a student to a class, like maybe a general elective class, a math class, or a specials class, this is what I would want for that section of time, maybe a smaller visual schedule that's specific for the activities that focus on a single activity or sequence. I think about this often with vocational activities. If I was working with the student to master some vocational skills, and they may have a series of things that they would do in an office. You know, they need to gather the papers, sort the papers, staple them in these, and then pass them out. But it's a series of skills that break down a long task. And this example on the side is one we've probably all seen about the arrival to school. To get your materials off, put them where they go, and to get ready to start your day. But it doesn't have to be a full day schedule. It could be activity to activity or single classes.
And I think this is a great place where paraprofessionals, you're working with the student and being able to get that feedback to the classroom teacher is going to be really helpful. Because again, your classroom teachers are probably going to be making the student schedules that they do all day. But again, you guys work so intensely with some of these students that you know the ins and outs. So you know when their days are falling apart, you know what activities they're struggling with. So again, our classroom teachers are great, but they really need your help and kind of feedback and even suggestions. So I might need to say, you know what, Kevin is really struggling with his arrival to school. Have we thought about kind of making him an activity specific schedule? And then hopefully your teacher will be like, oh, great idea. and make it, but that suggestion coming from you, the paraprofessional, is going to be very helpful to your teacher.
So this is kind of what we just talked about, the activity specific schedules. And it doesn't have to be, like I said, for a full block of time. It could be as simple as centers, like we're going from this station to this station to this station. And it's just a visual support to help the student accomplish a series of small skills or a activity specific. I don't know, I'm kind of losing my words here.
Well, it's kind of like when you go to a math center. Oftentimes when you go to math center, you're doing more than one activity. Like you might do some type of sorting activity and then some type of matching activity. So I think for the student to really know, what is it that I have to do while I'm here? Because it kind of starts letting them also know, hey, when is this going to be over? Like, is this lady just going to keep putting activities in front of me and expect me to sit here for 4 hours? Or are there only, like in the case of the example that's there's these 5 activities really, and then I'm going to get my free time. And so the student sees when that ending is coming and when my reinforcement is coming. So I think it really helps with that.
But from a paraeducator standpoint, I always think that, really a lot of this falls on the teacher and creating these schedules. But it is a team effort to put those together, because this was not my strength in making great visuals. But it is the responsibility of everybody in that room, especially the paras that are working directly with students, to be able to coach a student through this and use this as a visual support. Maybe refer to this, look, we finished activity 2, we need to move on to activity 3. But the adults really need to help kids facilitate this or to use this. I mean, kids aren't going to automatically know how to use a visual schedule when they're put in front of them. Sometimes it may take, a pretty lengthy amount of time to consistently coach a kid through how to use this before they're independent with it.
And again, as paraeducators, you might go, you know what, we've been working on this a long time with Kevin, and he's just not getting this system. But as Kevin's there's been lots of examples that we've already shown you. So there's different ways to change it up. So you might be like, I think Kevin would do great with an individual schedule that looks like this. So again, that feedback to the teacher is going to be very helpful.
This is an important one, especially in the world of being a paraeducator, because we're not always in our classroom with students with that pretty visual that we've created and laminated it to their desk. There's going to be plenty of times where students are away from those that may need a portable visual schedule. And this is kind of what I like to use for my students going out to other classes. I really like the one on the bottom left here because it's a pocket envelope. You can keep all the pictures in there or symbols that relate to that specific class. Maybe this is your math folder here. And you may not always be totally aware of how that day is going to line out when you get in there. You can have the first couple activities on there. And when you get in there and see what the teacher's doing that day, you can create the rest of that schedule to kind of support that student through the class. But I really like this one on the left here that has the pockets for all those. Students can carry them. It's not very obtrusive. It fits under their desk, on their desk. You could hold it. But these are different samples of that. On the right, it's kind of similar to what we used to see in our older PEX books, which are really good for schedules too. This would be a binder, and each page would have a different type of schedule on it, or schedule for a different purpose. Maybe we've got a math schedule in there, a reading schedule, centers. But I really like these, and we often don't think about being able to carry those around with us, but they're just as important in other settings as they are in our own classroom too.
And if you haven't thought of a portable schedule, like if you're in elementary school, I think if you've got a 5th grader that you know is going to be going to middle school next year, I worked with a teacher that was really great at kind of transitioning. She was very intentional with our 5th grade students of doing that to help prepare them for middle school, where she knew they'd be going out to a little bit more classes. So she wanted to get away from her wall mounted schedule and go to something a little bit more portable. But again, all about building independence and really kind of personalizing it to what the student needs.
But again, I really like this as a visual support in those settings, because I always say students can argue with you all day long, but it's hard to argue with inanimate visuals. They're not going to argue back. You can keep referring to this is what comes next, save your voice, and it gets rid of that back and forth kind of counter progression.
You know, Kevin, I was in a preschool setting one time, and the teacher was fabulous with using these schedules. And so the little boy had gone and checked his schedule, and it was time to do like a literacy activity. And he picked it up. And as soon as he picked it up, you saw his face change and he stomped, but he still walked over to his little bucket that had his literacy activity. He picked it up. Now he slammed it down on the desk where like everything bounces out. And he started to walk away, but all the teacher did was point to that visual on his schedule that's had the symbol for whatever the literacy activity was. And he kind of looked at it, and again, he's grimacing. She never says anything. She's just pointing. And after about 30, 45 seconds, which feels like an eternity when you're standing there, he finally went and sat and did his activity. But yeah, it was great because there wasn't this back and forth of adult and child and this power struggle going on. She let the power of that schedule dictate it, and it could have gotten really messy there for a minute.
So there we talked about the types of schedules. We've got our portable schedules, our overall daily schedules, our comprehensive schedules, and our activity specific or class specific schedules. But here are some tips that may help you with implementing a schedule or some other supports that I think kind of go hand in hand with a visual schedule. But the first thing is we have to introduce the schedule. We have to explain the schedule purpose. We have to demonstrate the schedule usage. And like I say, this may take place over an extended period of time as students it may take a while to grasp that concept of how we move through this schedule. But the most important thing is being able to model that schedule. Like if you had one of the schedules with the pictures and students are moving them to the done as they finish, you may have to physically model that for the student every time. Now, I would model it myself, put it over there, and then put it back on the not finished side yet, and maybe encourage them to do it.
Point and gesture them.
Prompt them through that. But again, it has to be modeled repeatedly before a lot of our students grasp how to use it independently. This is probably my favorite tip to pair with a visual schedule. Is the first then. It's basically, first, let me explain this. A first then is not a progression of a schedule. We're not going to do math first and then reading. It's not like that. The then is always a chosen reinforcement for the student. First, we're going to do math. Then you're going to get to do this reinforcement activity. Maybe the student chose. Maybe it's silent reading. Maybe it is some candy, even though I don't like to reward kids with candy too often. Or maybe it's just a preferred activity. But why I like this paired with a visual schedule, if you're using the removable cards, the little picture symbols, they're Velcroed on, I take it right off my schedule and then put it on the first. Have the student choose the reinforcement. And this is my breath saver. That's what I call it. It saves all. When I say you can't argue with the inanimate visuals, this is the best one because the student chose their own reinforcement. They know what activity they have to do prior to getting that reinforcement. You can just point back to this. You don't have to say anything. After you've modeled this process several times, they should understand the concept. I'm working for this reinforcement. That just referring back to it, like maybe with like gesturing to this visual support, should help them understand the process. Well, yeah, I got to do this. Then I get to do this. But again, this is my saver, and I can't say enough good things about this paired with a visual schedule. This is probably a very important one too. And Tracy kind of alluded to this a little earlier. We have to be prepared for the unexpected. And when I say prepared for the unexpected, there's going to be things that come up from time to time. Fire drills are a big one. I hope you're all informed about fire drills. I do. I've worked with several administrators that truly believe in all fire drills should be a surprise to everyone. I've often encouraged them to come help my class on those days. But I like to prepare for that. At least know that a fire drill is coming. I can put it on that schedule. And assembly, this is a time of year where those are probably starting pretty regularly. Our holiday assemblies and all that. That's going to be a big change in our typical routine. So we need to make sure that our schedules for each kid reflects that, has those changes embedded so they can start preparing for it.
Again, we just know with those changes, that's when our kids fall apart. Again, it's that uncertainty, it's that anxiety, it's everything you mentioned earlier. So again, schedules really let us help our kids plan for those things.
And something like a fire drill, if you've got a kid that's really anxious about upcoming fire drills, maybe respond very inappropriately. I shouldn't say inappropriately, but respond very differently than I would. Maybe
very intensely
may lead to some meltdown behavior. You may want to pair that up too and know that when I'm changing this, I need to have some other supports in place. Do I need a social story about how to respond during a fire drill? Or do I need to go over what the expectations are? Or maybe like for an assembly, do I have choices where a student can participate, but with calm down activities embedded? Like when I'm frustrated, I could hold this item. And that's something, again, we're going to have to coach a student through. But the main thing is your schedule has to be flexible in some way to allow for the unexpected events, because we all know that can cause chaos in our classrooms. So there, do we have any questions? I know we went through that really fast. I just wanted y'all to see some different templates of visual schedules, but the important thing is being able to coach a student through those activities until they've mastered it independently. And even once they've mastered it independently, there may be times that they'll need some more coaching and modeling. You know, maybe they're having an off day or a little frustrated or a little anxious, but being able to coach a student through that, just checking them off, model that skill to them, kind of like what we're doing with this slide here.
So if you have a question, throw it in the chat. Again, like many of our topics, yes, your teacher is kind of taking the lead on these things, but you guys play such a critical role in supporting and continuing to model and kind of hold those expectations in place. And again, the feedback that you give your teachers of what's working and what's not working, and maybe being able to give them ideas of how to tweak things is very valuable. I really appreciated it when I was in the classroom and my paras gave me that feedback, because sometimes they just worked more intensely, particularly with certain students, than maybe I did. So we always appreciated that. All right, Kevin, I'm not seeing any questions come in, but feel free to still drop it in as we go to our next.
And that's right. And when we send our follow-up email, any questions that pop up, just reach out. And of course, you've got our emails too. We can answer those at any time for you. So here we are with our feedback. You just want to have them fill this out. We'll send that to them.
Yeah, we'll send you a follow-up email that'll have both the WKEC and KATC feedback forms in there. It is really important that you fill out those forms.
So this kind of wraps up our day. We finished the feedback, but I did want to add some other things. Our next Parabyte is scheduled for Monday, December 16th. And avoiding counter aggression is one I think all adults in a school need to get, I mean, at least be aware of, if not improve on. I know, well, we'll talk about that then. I don't want to spoil all the fun. But again, we've talked about the feedback. So if you can complete those when we send it, I greatly appreciate it. But as we move through these series, if there's topics that you really want to know more about, reach out to us. We're still planning these to wrap up the rest of this year and then looking forward to 24, 25, right? That's this year, isn't it? 25, 26. Gosh, they're all running together.
Yeah, there's the survey if you've not filled out, kind of letting us know what topics, because really you guys have dictated the order of these things. We've really gone back to that survey. But if there's something not on there that you feel like is really important, like Kevin said, let us know. And we are flexible and we will make changes and help provide you that information. All right, 10 o'clock, Kevin. We did it.
Right on. But I hope you all have a great little break from school this week.
Happy Thanksgiving.
My fingers are crossed that it's stress-free for the next couple of days, but my gut's telling me there's a lot of change in there. So be prepared to help your students. But again, if you need anything, reach out to us. Thank you.